Listen. You're in a privileged position to learn a thing or two. Keep your mouth shut and your eyes open.
We wonder why today we have a rise in socialism and communism and fascism and the anger against the rich. You know, these young senators and congressmen, they want to tax the rich, to charge them 70% taxes and all this. And I'm going, why are they doing this? Well, it's because our schools don't teach us about money. And that's why I'm in this business. It's not going to change. It's really, it's tragic. So when I ask people, I said, what does school teach you about money? Get this zzz. And I said, does your teacher know anything about money? They go, zzz. Do our political leaders know anything about money? Zzz. You know, there's this, like money is the root of all evil in many people's minds. Yeah. But we all use money. That's the irony of it.
The US Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, the European Central Bank. The world over, central banks are some of the most powerful institutions, their arsenal allowing them to adjust interest rates, inflation, print money, and shore up the economy. They're usually designed to be independent from political interference. But is that changing? Applause, handshakes, and backslaps aside, President Trump hasn't proved to be the biggest fan of Fed Chair Jerome Powell, openly criticizing the US Federal Reserve's decision to raise rates on several occasions.
I think the Fed has gone crazy. I really disagree with what the Fed is doing.
The Fed is out of control. I think what they're doing is wrong, and they're making a mistake.
But Donald Trump isn't the only one questioning monetary decisions. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is at the forefront of attacks against his country's central bank. He remains vehemently against raising borrowing costs, which is believed to be the reason the bank hasn't increased them. And in India, the central bank governor there unexpectedly resigned on Monday. Urjit Patel had been embroiled in a series of clashes with Prime Minister Modi's administration, putting the Reserve Bank of India under intense pressure to ease lending conditions. Experts warn of real economic consequences. Still, for now, it seems there's a global tussle over who gets the keys to their country's monetary policy.
Well, the banks run the world. It's called the central banks of America. You know, the Fed, the ECB, the European Central Bank, the PBOC, People's Bank of China, the Bank of Japan. Capitalism is run by a central banking system. That's called communism also.
Yeah.
The government is, communism is centralized government, capitalism is centralized banking. And the more you step back, you look at the big picture, the ultra-rich control the central banks. For example, the Rothschild Corporation, let's say there's 50 central banks, the Rothschilds own about 48 of them.
The Rothschild banking dynasty, easily one of the wealthiest families in history, but also the single largest source of conspiracy theories. The vast and shrouded wealth of the Rothschilds has endured for generations and has unsurprisingly made it hard to tell what is fact and what is fiction.
This family's been accused of nearly every conspiracy we could find. They're alleged to be leaders of secret societies, run the world's media and financial systems, and other shady dealings. The name Rothschild is synonymous with extravagant old world wealth.
Our story begins in medieval Europe. By the 10th century, most of Europe was under the domain of Christianity. Political power was invariably tied to religion, which made being a non-Christian very unfavorable. Like most Jewish families at the time, the Rothschilds were involved in finance. You see, in medieval Europe, Christianity forbade anyone from lending money with interest, leaving this otherwise profitable business into the hands of the Jews. Experience with money lending, and by extension anything relating to finance, was passed down generations, and the Rothschilds were no exception. They specialized in exchanging currencies and trading collectible coins.
Well, the Rothschild family, as we know them today, began with Meyer Amschel Rothschild. He lived in the 18th century and served as a court Jew for German nobility. As odd as it sounds today, a court Jew was actually a respected banking position. At the time, the act of charging interest for money borrowed, or usury, was prohibited by the Bible. However, Jews had no such religious restriction, and so they were free to handle everyone's finances. Rothschild quickly amassed a huge fortune working for powerful European nobles, and married the daughter of another court Jew. They had 5 sons, who each established extensive banking industries in 5 major European countries: Germany, Austria, Britain, Italy, and France. In order to keep their massive fortunes from dispersing too widely, Meyer forced his children into arranged marriages within the family, not unlike royal intermarriage. Moreover, his will barred female descendants from a full inheritance. Since then, the Rothschilds have built up their wealth even further by serving as Europe's bankers during major conflicts, including the French Revolution and both sides of the Napoleonic Wars. They've also been involved in funding massive projects like the Suez Canal, and once even bailed out the Bank of England.
And so you and I don't have a prayer, because money makes the world go round. And the economy runs on money, like it or not. So that's why I became a student of money back in the 80s. And I began looking at, I was a student of R. Buckminster Fuller, a guy who created the geodesic domes and all that. And he wrote a book called Grunge of Giants. Grunge stands for Gross Universal Cash Heist. It's how the ultra-rich steal our wealth. The rich don't work for money, because our money is toxic, our money is corrupt. Our financial system, or money, is designed to make the rich richer, but keep the poor middle class poorer. And that's why our schools don't teach us about money, because the school system works for the central banks also. So I remember raising my hand when I was 9 years old, talking to my 4th grade teacher, and I said, when am I going to learn about money? And she was this woman who should have retired 50 years earlier. She was so sick and tired of kids by this time. She says, the love of money is the root of all evil. And I said, what am I, in Sunday school? And I was this punky little 9-year-old kid. And she says, we don't teach money at school. I said, why not? And she couldn't answer me. And she got very flustered. She said, sit down, take your seat. And then I got curious. I said, why don't we learn about money? She says, go ask your father. He's my boss. My father was the head of education, PhD, all that stuff. I go home and ask him, I said, why don't we learn about money in school? And he looked at me and says, because the government doesn't let us teach that subject. The government tells us what we can teach and what we can't teach. And I thought that was strange. And I said, but aren't we going to school to learn about money? He says, no, your job is to get a job. I said, but you get a job to earn money. He goes, no, you're supposed to just get a job. I went, no. Isn't the purpose of a job to earn money? He goes, you're correct. I said, so why don't I just learn about money? I can skip the job part, First of all, let's go back to what is financial education? It's not get a job, work hard, save money, and invest in a well-diversified portfolio of stocks, bonds, mutual funds, and ETFs. That's not it. Money is, the financial industry is 2 things, debt and taxes. So what happens to the average person in a financial crash, they don't know what to do. And right now, as you know, for the middle class of the world, we're in a crash. The purchasing power of the yen, the euro, the rupiah, all going down. And people are working harder and harder and harder, and the central banks of the world are printing more money. Einstein said, imagination is more important than knowledge, but knowledge empowers imagination. And what most people lack is real business knowledge, like accounting. like debt, like taxes. You got to know that stuff, but they don't teach it in school to anybody. We're going to talk about this thing called the Cantillon effect. Would you explain what that is?
Yeah, so the Cantillon effect is when governments or central banks print money, it doesn't go to everyone in the population equally. It goes to the insiders, the political insiders.
So who would be the political insiders today?
Clintons. These are the insiders that are buddy-buddy with the people, the central bankers, who are printing the money. They're closest to it. So they get it, and it hasn't got out into the economy to create inflation in either consumer prices or assets. So their purchasing power, they get the maximum benefit from this money printing, where by the time it gets down to the average Joe, if it ever does, prices have gone up so much that their purchasing power is less than it was before they printed the money in the first place.
In the last just 10 years, since the financial crisis, what the Fed has done is they've electronically, I call it conjured or fabricated, because this money doesn't come from profit or revenue or anything real. It literally comes from their ability to, create it out of nowhere. Over $4.5 trillion worth of money from nowhere, which they have basically allowed to go into the private banking system. So the banks, having messed up the economy, having messed up the financial system themselves, are effectively given the benefit of having more money thrown at them in return for them being able to do what they want to do with no strings attached.
Right. No, but no, man, why don't you say the Fed was created as a backup for the big banks in case the big banks screwed up, the Fed would bail them out. Wasn't that probably the intention?
Well, yeah, and it absolutely, that's very true. One of the ways that the Fed came into being was because about 100 years before our last financial crisis in 1907, there was a huge, what they call panic on Wall Street. All the banks were losing confidence in each other. People were like storming their doors. There were cops in the streets trying to beat them back. I mean, it was mass chaos. And a man named J.P. Morgan, whose name is now on the largest bank in the United States, J.P. Morgan Chase, was given the ability by, at the time, the U.S. Treasury Department under President Theodore Roosevelt to use $25 million, drop in the bucket in today's money, but to basically give to whoever he wanted to on Wall Street to fix the problem. And he did that. That was the first official bailout in U.S. history. It went to J.P. Morgan to do what he wanted with. But what he thought after that, it's great to get money from the Fed to basically help your friends in a panic financial situation, but he was afraid that there would come a time where the U.S. government, where the Treasury Department would not be able to foot the bill for a financial emergency. So he, amongst other bankers at the time, major bankers of which he was the lead, started to push through the Senate, push through themselves, and figure out a way to have the central bank, the sort of mothership of banks, whereby private banks, when they had an emergency, could go and literally get money. I mean, it's basically like an unlimited ATM. That's how it came about. Ultimately, it came about in 1913 through the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. But those 6 years in between, the panic and when the Fed was created, at that point, J.P. Morgan died. His son, Jack Morgan, was running the firm. But the reality was these bankers worked with a couple of people in Washington, so it was very much a collusion between the central bank and the people in government who ran the finance committee. So the people who were supposed to protect finances for the public, for the rest of the country, worked together to create the central bank. They sold it to the public when the vote was cast for the act to create the bank as a means to give money to like poor farmers in the Midwest. If there was a crisis that Wall Street didn't want to give money to small businesses, the Fed would effectively make sure there was enough money to run into those businesses. That's how it was sold. The reality is that since it was created and through today, the Fed, despite what its stated mission is, which is to keep the financial system kind of stable, to keep unemployment at a certain good level and so forth, actually still has the unlimited ability to create money out of nowhere and to effectively give it to the largest banks in the country.
I don't know what would happen, but I think the house of cards is about to come down anyway because the corruption inside our banking system is at all-time highs. This has happened before in history. It's been going on for thousands of years where the banking system, I'm not blaming bankers. I like my banker a lot because he gives me money. But anyway, the whole system was rigged by the banks, the golden rule. He who controls the gold makes the rules. And so I decided I'd rather be on the banker side than the employee side. It's just a choice.
Listen, you're in a privileged position to learn a thing or two. Keep your mouth shut and your eyes open.